Good morning and Shavua Tov. I hope everyone had a wonderful Shabbat and a beautiful Purim. Seems like a distant memory now that we are less than 3 weeks away from Pesach. Over the course of these next 3 weeks, I want to discuss the laws of Pesach. This week, talking about preparation for Pesach. One needs a Hechsher, medications, cosmetics, cleaning the house. Next week, talking about the laws of the Seder itself. And the final week, talking about the unique halachot for this year when Erev Pesach falls on a Shabbat. The halachot are dedicated in loving memory of Yaakov Yecheskel ben Esther Malka. Let's start right at the beginning. One needs a Hechsher. This is something which potentially has the ability to save many people lots of money, and this is something which our Chachamim took very seriously. The Gemara says in numerous places, Chasa Torah al Mamonam Shel Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu cares about the money, the financial situation of Jewish people. And there are two major approaches within halakha with regards to Pesach, because we find a unique halakha in the context of Pesach which we don't find in other places in kashrut, and that's the concept of bitul, nullification. Generally speaking, all other prohibitions, as long as the prohibited food is less than a 60th or less, then that food is permissible. So if, for example, a person has a meaty dish and a drop of milk falls into that, we know that if there are 60 times more the meat than the milk, then that food is absolutely permissible to eat. However, we do find on Pesach that chametz asur b'mashahu, which means even a drop of chametz which falls into the food on Pesach becomes prohibited the entire dish. And there is no concept of nullification on Pesach according to the final halakha. This is because chametz will, after 7 days, become permissible to eat, and therefore this is considered davar sheyesh lo matirin. It will one day in the future become permissible, and therefore we don't rely on nullification with this. Other foods, if you were to prohibit the milk which fell into the meat, the whole dish would be prohibited for eternity, and therefore it becomes allowed. However, what's very important to understand is that this halakha of a drop falling into the food makes the entire food asur on Pesach is only when the food, the chametz, falls into the Pesach food on Pesach itself. Then the halakha says that one may not rely on nullification and the entire food becomes prohibited. However, when this happens before Pesach, as long as there are 60 times of non-chametz food, then that food does not become prohibited and may be eaten on Pesach itself. The Shulchan Aruch follows the opinion, this is for the Sfaradim, that we do not say that the mixture is reawakened on Pesach. Some argue that despite it being nullified before Pesach, but once Pesach arrives, then the forbidden particles of chametz become reawakened, and therefore the original law that a drop of chametz which falls in becomes prohibited applies again. However, the opinion of the majority of the Chachamei Sfarad is that this is not the case, and once it's nullified before Pesach, then there is no issue to eat that food on Pesach itself. So if a drop of chametz fell in, according to the final halakha for Sfaradim, Hacham Ovadia, one may have that food on Pesach. The Ramah for the Ashkenazim is stricter. That's one principle. Second principle we find, which is relevant to the discussion of Hechsherim, is whether we are machzikinan isura. Do we presume that something bad has happened, that something prohibited has happened? Generally speaking, in the laws of kashrut, we do not assume that things go wrong. Unless you see something going wrong, you don't need to assume that something prohibited has fallen into your food. And the Shulchan Aruch and the majority of the Rishonim extend this to Pesach as well. There is no reason to differentiate between the kashrut the rest of the year and on Pesach. So too on Pesach, if you have food or anything set aside which people haven't been careful to ensure that no chametz has fallen over it, the Shulchan Aruch clearly rules that that food is still permissible, and we don't need to assume that chametz fell into it. The Ramah, again for the Ashkenazim, is stricter with regards to this. And these are two different approaches, and there are many more examples where the Ramah for the Ashkenazim is stricter than the Shulchan Aruch, because the Ramah understands that since we find this unique halakha that on Pesach itself there is no nullification, we take on various other stringencies. However, according to the Shulchan Aruch, that's the only stringency which we find in this context of Pesach, but other things stay the same. And just like in other laws of kashrut, we say that the prohibition is not reawakened, so too, we say that on Pesach. Just like during the rest of the year, we don't presume something has gone wrong, the same applies on Pesach as well. These 2 points are very important to understand which Hechsherim, whether a person needs to buy food with Hechsher on Pesach, which we will continue to discuss tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.